Decades of underfunding and political neglect have left Canada's military weak and unprepared. Our armed forces are in dire straits and an alarmingly poor state. If we don't act now, Canada will not only be unable to defend itself, but it will cease to be taken seriously by our allies. Retired Lieutenant General Michel Maisonneuve has served at the highest levels, working alongside our allies in NATO, and shared his insights in a recent interview with Frontier Centre President David Lees. Maisonneuve says Canada is no longer at the table when major defense decisions are made. The Americans don't ask us what we think anymore because they know we can't contribute. That is a stunning indictment. Canada, once respected for punching above its military weight, has been reduced to an afterthought. The problem is Canada doesn't take its defense seriously anymore. The government has allowed our forces to wither. The Air Force is still buying CF-18s from the 1980s because the long-delayed F-35 procurement is years behind schedule. The Navy, once a competent maritime force, is barely functional, with no operational submarines and a fleet nowhere near what is needed to patrol our vast coastlines. Meanwhile, the Army struggles to recruit and retain soldiers, leaving its numbers dangerously low. Maisonneuve says, "We have an army in name only," adding, "If we were called upon tomorrow to deploy a fully operational combat force, we couldn't do it." Even more shocking is the poor readiness of Canadian troops. A recent report found that 75% of Canadian military personnel are overweight. Maisonneuve says, "It's unacceptable. We are supposed to be training warriors, not watching fitness standards collapse. When defense forces can't even stay fit, it suggests institutional rot. Our allies have noticed." Canada was locked out of AUKUS, the military alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Maisonneuve says it wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate snub. The Americans don't see us as a serious defense partner anymore. That snub should have been a wake-up call. Instead, our government shrugged it off. Meanwhile, Washington is openly questioning Canada's value in NATO. The Americans see the numbers. Canada refuses to meet the minimum defense spending requirement of 2% of GDP. Instead of fulfilling its obligations, Canada offers up empty promises and expects others to pick up the slack. We need to fully fund the military, and not just hit the NATO target, but exceed it. Our allies spend real money on their defense because they understand that security is not optional. Maisonneuve suggests Canada should aim for at least 2.5% of GDP, not just as a show of commitment, but as a necessity to rebuild our capabilities. Beyond money, Maisonneuve argues that military culture must be restored. He says, "We've allowed ideology to creep into the ranks. The military's primary function is to defend the nation, not to serve as a social experiment. We need to get back to training warriors, not worrying about whether we're ticking the right diversity boxes." He believes a return to a warrior ethos is essential. Without it, the military will remain directionless. Procurement is another disaster that Maisonneuve insists must be fixed immediately, saying, "We've spent years dithering on replacing equipment, and every delay puts us further behind. The F-35 deal should have been signed years ago, but political hesitation means we won't see a full fleet for years. The Navy urgently needs new submarines and icebreakers, especially to secure the Arctic, where other global powers, particularly Russia, are ramping up their presence." Maisonneuve points to manpower as the biggest issue, saying, "We need to rebuild the forces, period. That means recruiting, training, and retaining soldiers, and we are failing at all three." He even suggested that Canada should consider implementing a national service requirement to increase troop numbers and instill a sense of duty and responsibility in younger generations. "We used to be a country that took security seriously," says Maisonneuve. "What happened? How did we go from being a country that contributed meaningfully to global security to one that can't even defend itself? Successive governments let this happen, first by neglecting funding, then by letting bureaucracy suffocate procurement, and finally by diluting the core purpose of the military. Canada must act now, or it will cease to be taken seriously.